Welcome back to another micro lecture for Module 5, Programming Logic using Python. I am your professor, Professor Fiske, and let's get started. So up until this point, we've spoken about while loops and do while loops in passing because Python does not use do while loops, but I want to go into detail about one of the most popular, most efficient, most widely used looping structures or iterative statements that you will use in your Python journey, and that is the vaunted for loop. Now, there are many different ways to write a for loop, but there are two main ways that I want to go over. The first way is the easy button. So this is the easy button, if you will. And what this does is it takes an array, or as we call it in Python, a list, and it provides you with the outputs of that list that you can do something with, right? So in this case, we have a list of fruit. And in this list, we have 3 different fruits that we want to store in the same structure, all right? Up until this point, we haven't spoken about lists, and so now you're going to learn about them in passing because I'm not going to go into a deep conversation about them at the moment. We're just going to implement them and then go deeper into this in a different module. So stay tuned for another micro lecture on lists, as well as dictionaries, otherwise known as objects. Understand that a list is an array. That's what they are. Python is just being fancy calling them lists. I know they probably have a real good reason for calling them a list, but in every other language, to include other scripting languages, we do not call these lists. We call them arrays. Now, what's nice about a list is that in the Python context of a list, it is truly a list because an array in and of itself is immutable and it cannot change. However, a list is an array which is not immutable and it can change in size. So up to this point, like I said, we're not going to talk about lists any further. Let's talk about for loops. Once again, we're using W3 Schools, and so I want to shout out to W3 Schools and say thank you so much for putting this content out there. They've always been a great value add in all of my lectures, and I also use other sites like Geeks for Geeks and Tutorials Point, as well as ProgramIZ. And so if you need any help, those are the best developer documentation sites and tutorial sites that I would recommend other than Codecademy. Now I'm going to pause here and say if you haven't done so, please hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps me in all the content that I create, and it lets me know what you're interested in and if this information is valuable to you going forward. All right, so let's get into for loops. There are 2 different types of for loops that I want to discuss in this specific micro lecture. The first type of for loop are the for loops that are the simplest to implement, and that is for, and you can use any variable name you want here, but in the context of this example is for x in fruits. Print x. All right, what's going on here? So let's go to REPL and let's make this a reality. So up until this point, we did a while loop. What we are going to do is we are going to say, I love you, while loop. You are so cool. But all of this will now go, or actually, let's go to another lecture because I do not want to get rid of this. So let's go back to another lecture. Let me see if this is a good one. Nope, this is JavaScript. That was a mistake. I'm sorry, this was Java. That was a mistake. So we'll go home. And I wanted Supium using computation, actually. This is perfect. All right, great. So we're going to erase all of this, and we're going to use this one again. In this case, I don't want to use the word fruits, or I don't want to use the variable fruits because, well, when I normally do this analogy, or I do this example, I like to use something of real-world importance domain-wise to you. If you went to go work at AutoNation or something like that along those lines, you would use something called trucks. And then you would say trucks equals, and let's put a couple of trucks in here, Chevy, or truck manufacturers, I should say, Chevy, Ford, Toyota. So in this case, I guess I should say manufacturers or car makers. All right, and then we'll do one more truck manufacturer, Ram. Okay, great. We have 4 trucks. Now, up until this point, we have not done anything with these trucks. If I tried to print this array, print car makers, there is a 50-50 chance in my mind that this will not print right. It will just print a memory location. It did print right. Okay, that's great. This is the array. But if you presented this to the end user, this wouldn't make any sense, especially if you were trying to present, a menu that they can select from. So, in this case, what if I just wanted to iterate over each of these specific car makers? Well, what I can do is I can use a for loop. For, and I would say car, or in this case truck. So makes, and then I can say make in makes, print make. Now, what is this going to do? Well, what it's going to do is it's going to iterate over the list makes. In each iteration, it's going to take the position that it's iterating at that moment in time, and it's going to place that value into the variable make. If we go back to W3 Schools, notice that they used X. This is a variable. You can name that whatever you want as long as it's not a reserved word. This is the name of the actual thing you would like to iterate over. All right. So what's actually going to happen is this is going to iterate over all of the makes that sit in the list one by one, and it's going to do something with them. Okay. So let's do this. We're going to debug. Well, first we're going to run it to make sure it runs right. So let's run it. It should print them all on the list like this. Great. And now we're going to look through them all. We're going to debug them because I'm not bad. Debug. Great. Now that we are debugging, it's going to stop at line 3. At the moment, the list makes has been initialized with these 4 values. But if you look to the right, there is no variable make. Now, when I pass through this, now I have a variable make, and notice what has been assigned the variable make. Chevy. What is Chevy? Chevy is the first make in the list makes, right? It's a car manufacturer. We call that a make, right? So Chevy is a make. It's in the 0th position of the list, and therefore it will iterate first. And here we go. And what's going to happen? It's going to keep iterating over those one by one if you look at the bottom, and it's going to keep on printing the next name in line. Now, right now, this isn't a very efficient use case or effective use case because it doesn't really tell you why. Well, why would I want to do this? Well, let's say, for instance, you were writing a sorting algorithm or you were writing a filter algorithm, and you wanted to filter based on a specific subset of values. Or let's say you wanted to omit a value and refilter and resort. Well, that's actually not bad. You can say if Chevy, okay, if make equals Chevy, continue. Otherwise, print make. Now, did I do something wrong here? If make, it's like I'm writing in another language sometimes. If make equals Chevy. If make equals Chevy, continue, otherwise print the make. So what is going to happen? Well, if I debug this again, what's the first make in this list of makes that's going to fill the variable make? Do you remember? Well, it's whatever's in the 0th position because that's the first iteration that's going on. That's the first iteration of the loop. And so Chevy is in the make variable now because it's in the 0th position of the list. What's going to happen? Do you remember what the continued jump statement does from the while loop micro lecture? Well, it's going to skip over it, and it's not going to print the make. Notice down here in the debugger, there's no print for make. If I actually remove this breakpoint and print the rest of it, it'll print for till and ran. What this for loop actually does is it allows us to actually look through a lot of what we're already doing and come to the conclusion about what we want to happen. Maybe we only want Fords, and so we tell the loop, hey, filter out everything else and just give me Fords, or cherry pick the things that I want. So let's say I just wanted Chevy, and I didn't want anything else. Well, I could say break, and then print. So what's going to happen now? Well, what's going to happen is it's just going to print Chevy, and it's not going to print anything else, because it found what it was looking for. This is one of the reasons why we use for loops, and this is one of the reasons why we use them prolifically. But there's another reason, or there's another situation, there are other situations in our development cycle where we would use these types of, programming statements. There are 2 things this does for us. It makes the for loops easy, and it makes it not error out. There will be no out-of-index errors. But there's something else that we might want to do. And we want to be careful when we're doing it. There might be a situation where we want to do something like this. For make in, or for I in range 0 to 3. Alright, so this is 0, 1, 2, 3. Now what I want you to do is I want you to take makes, I, makes, I. Now, what's going on right now? The first for loop, which we call a for each loop, is tightly coupled with the array, right? The first for loop was tightly coupled with the array. It was called a for each loop, really, and it's a newer implementation of the for loop, because a for loop is normally loosely coupled with the array or loosely coupled with the list. What do I mean by that? Well, notice here I have for I in range. So basically what the for loop is going to do, it's going to count 0, 1, 2, 3, stop. It doesn't give a hoot about what's in the makes list at all. It's going to go 4 iterations and stop. That's what I just told it to do. This is the start at the 0th position. This is the end at the 3rd position. I don't necessarily have to do this. I can just tell it where to start at 0 or start at 1, and it will start at 1, which means it'll start at Ford and omit Chevy. So in this case, if I ran this, it'll print Ford, Toyota, and Ram, because Chevy will never be... Why did it print Chevy? Or is it 3? I'm sorry. This is the end, right? End at 1. If I just wanted to print Ford through Ram, I would have to say 1 through 3. Start at 1, end at 3. Run, and now it'll print Ford, Toyota, Ram. It printed nothing. Why are you doing this? 1 second. Start at 1, which is Ford. Right? Makes 1. So fall in. Alright, so makes is 1. Alright, so this should never, makes is not Chevy, makes is Ford. Oh, I'm not printing anything. Sorry guys, I'm having a right giggle. So let's put this one out here. That's why it didn't print. I was wondering what the heck was going on. I know this is supposed to work. Alright, we're going to run it now. No debugging. Now it'll print Ford, Toyota, and Ram, because I'm saying to print it. Or I guess I should go to 4, because it stopped at 3 and it didn't run through 3. So it went 1, 2, and then it saw 3 and said, well, I'm stopping at 3. Because this is the end, right? End there, don't go any further. So if I have for I in range 1 and 4, what this is saying is, well, I want you to start at 1, I want you to end at 4, and I want you to print all the things that are in there. And if one of these equals Chevy, then I want you to print that and break. But Chevy is in the 0th position, so this skips Chevy. So this code will never fire. If I, for instance, came in here and said 0, start at 0, because with 1 value, it's start. 2 values, it's start end. 3 values means skip by 2. Okay, so if we go back to the documentation, start, stop, and then step or skip, you can call it whatever you want, but it skips by 2. All right, great. And we'll use this in a second, but for now, we're going to run this because we want it just to print Chevy. Because this break is going to be our exit condition. It printed Chevy because that is all I wanted, and we're good to go. Now let's do this with a step. All right, we'll do this with a step, and then I'll explain to you why we might do it this way. I'm going to erase the Chevy exit condition because I don't want that anymore. Because what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you how it's going to step. So in this case, I'm saying step by 2. So if I'm at the 0th position, I'm starting at the 0th position, and I step by 2, what's going to print? Pause right now and give that a go. What's going to print? What should print? Well, if you said Chevy and Toyota, then I would say that you are correct. Because, and we can debug this so I can show you proof of concept, when it falls into the for loop determines, okay, I have a range function, and that range function is stating that I need to start the loop at the 0th position of the list, which is Chevy. I need to stop the loop at the 4th position, which is after Ram. Okay, so it's going to stop at Ram when Ram is done or finished. And I want you to skip by 2, which means if I go into this, you can see over here, it's 0. So what's going to print? Well, Chevy's going to print. But now, this is 2, because we stepped by 2. And now what's going to print is Toyota. But notice what's about to happen. Because it's stepping or incrementing the iterator by 2, if I incremented this iterator by 2 one more time, what is it going to print? Nothing. Because nothing's in the 4th position. Chevy's in the 0th position, Ford's in the 1st position, Toyota's in the second position, Ram is in the third position. If I opened up the list, you can see it here. Chevy is in the 0th, Ford is in the 1st, Toyota's in the 2nd, Ram is in the 3rd. And I want to tell you something. One more thing you need to know about this. These are called key value pairs. I'm using the number 0, 1, 2, and 3 to get the value that that key is associated with. These are called key value pairs. And we're going to talk about that at great length when we get into objects. Lists are very dumb key value pairs. Remember the word dumb? I'm not using that word to say that this is stupid. I'm using that word to say there is no intelligence derived from this. There's no AI derived from this. This is just the way the structure works. The computer does not know why 0 is Chevy. The computer does not know why 2 is Toyota. And in that specific frame of reference, the computer is, in effect, blind and or dumb. It does not know. It can't tell you, right? That's really what it boils down to. It cannot tell you why. It doesn't know why. When we get to the object references, when we get to objects, it will know why, and it will be able to tell you why in a way. I know you might be laughing at me right now and saying, how in the world would you do that? It's not artificial intelligence. It's actually very simple because we're going to tell the computer why. We'll give it a real key. So the computer can then use that key instead of these numbers to give us the values that we're looking for. But with that being said, what I'm trying to get at here is there are two ways to write for loops. The first way is called a for each loop, where it's just for make and makes or something along those lines, and it loops through one by one and we're good to go. Those are tightly coupled loops. Now I'm going to write these out side by side so you can see the way they look. Now, I'm going to stop debugging for a second. Which one looks simpler? Well, this one. This one is simpler. But this one, you sacrifice control. You sacrifice a lot of control. The control you sacrifice is you can't tell it where to start. You can't tell it where to end. You can't tell it where to step or how many steps to take. And finally, there's one more thing you can't do here. And that's not evident right now. I'm going to give you some advanced knowledge into industry secrets when it comes to this specific for loop. If you attempt to modify the values in this loop, in a for each loop, you will get an error thrown because this array or list is tightly coupled to this for each loop. And if you change the values, what you're essentially doing is you're changing the loop. You're modifying the loop while it's looping. That is unacceptable. You are not allowed to do that. You may get away with it in Python because Python, you're allowed to do a lot of things you can't do in other languages. But I'm telling you, this is a programming logic course, not just Python. And I want to tell you from a programming logic perspective, when you try to modify these specific values in this specific list and or array in a for each loop, you are defying one of the principles that we hold true, which is this loop is heavily dependent on this array. Once this array is loaded into this loop, once it starts looping, it never reloads it, which means that if it changes, then the scope of the loop just changed and the computer does not know what to do and it will throw an error. So if you are doing a bubble sort, if you are doing filtering or whatnot, and you don't want to create a whole other loop to dump that into, because you can create another loop to dump that into and you can just Voska this guy and have another loop that says makes X or makes 2 or whatever, then you would use a for each loop, which is cleaner, by the way, in this respect, because what for each loops let you do, they give you the power to do modifications to this array with no problems, because this loop is not tightly coupled to this list. The list is not a part of the loop, which is why we have to use this iterator to index the loop to get the value that we want, or index the array to get the value that we want. The loop and the array are loosely coupled, which makes this a much easier conversation. Okay, with that being said, I'm going to pause here and I'm going to say, please, once again, like and subscribe. I really appreciate all of your support, and I will see you in the next micro lecture. Otherwise, as I say in all of my videos, good luck, have fun, ciao.